Has your opponent ever played a card that makes you wonder, why am I not using that card? Let's talk about a few of those today. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Top Commander. I'm your host, Matt, here to put a spin on things. So today we're going to be talking about 5 cards that are underrated, and by underrated we mean you don't see play that often. Or maybe you do, but maybe they should be played a little bit more often than they should be. But before we get into that, if you like this video and any others that I'll be uploading, be sure to hit the subscription button. Hit that notification bell so you find out when I upload a new video. If you know anybody that likes content like this, be sure to share it with them. If you wish to support this channel directly, be sure to visit patreon.com/topcommander, capital T, capital C. We'll have that right here on the screen. Alright, now, getting into it. 5 cards that are underrated, that don't see that much play. In the history of Magic, there has been over 20,000 cards. Commander can utilize all of them, besides, of course, a few exceptions, depending on what sets they're in, like the unsets or the ban list, etc., etc. That stuff out of the way. But there's still a lot of cards that can be used in Commander. And yet, there's a few gems that you don't see play that often. And why is that? Obviously, according to some people, or the majority of people, there are more efficient ways to do what some of these cards do. But maybe it's something that you might need to take a second look at, because one day when you blow somebody out of the water with this card, it makes that much of a difference. And then you can be that guy that's like, yeah, this is my new pet card. Alright, so what are the 5 cards that we'll be talking about today? So the first one I'm going to start with is a fairly new one that came out in War of the Spark. It's an uncommon Neo form. It is a green and a blue for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. There's a little downside, but the big part of it is search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, then shuffle your library. So that's a mouthful, but so what does this card equate to? It's a one-time use sorcery speed birthing pod, essentially. It helps you climb the ladder of CMC to find cards out of your deck. Now, obviously this is a tutor and it puts it directly into play, with the downside of sacrificing a creature. This is a card that should probably see play more often, especially in blue-green decks. Maybe you need that one card out of your deck that's really good or would really just kind of clinch the game for you. On a more competitive standpoint, yeah, this card could help you find a combo piece. But in a casual setting, maybe you need something else out of your deck. Maybe you need to get to it quicker. Maybe it needs to be on the field for your deck to function. This is one of those cards that could just help you out. And when you're talking about a card that has an effect like Birthing Pod or Prime Speaker Vanifar, which is simply Birthing Pod on a stick, it's one of those things that you can... There's a lot of potential for a card like this, and with it being a sorcery speed, and you're in blue with it automatically, you're in blue and it's a sorcery. Archaeomancer, and there's a couple other creatures and some other cards that let you fetch sorceries and instants out of your graveyard so you can reuse them. So you could potentially get a more complex version of a birthing pod, or it could just help you get what you need. It could turn a token into a mana dork, or you could turn mana dork into a Grand Abolisher, Gadget Teague, or any number of different things that you could do. You could turn a Precursor Golem, which is 5 CMC, into a Steel Hellkite for 6. a lot of this depending on what's in your deck, what you're fetching out with it. It's a really good card, and I honestly don't see it played that often. And it's just one of those cards that it could potentially set up a game and make you have that edge, because most people don't play it. Therefore, most people aren't really going to expect something like this. But enough about Neoform. Let's move on to the next one. This one is a lot older. It is Procenter Store. It is 2 and a green for a 1/2 creature druid. Its ability is to tap it, and you can untap target land. So, at face value, it's a 3 mana bad Birds of Paradise. Especially if you're untapping a command tower, then you have multiple color options to be able to produce. But the part that makes this card really shine is that Threshold. Threshold, you can only use this ability if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. When you tap it, you untap 3 target lands. So that's a 3 mana Gilded Lotus, or any number of things. Like, it just ramps you so much further ahead. And especially if you're in multiple colors, if you run it, you typically see these at the more casual tables, the bounce lands like the Is It Boilerworks and things like that that tap for 2 mana. You're ramping even more. It's another card that just, it's an older one, it's very cheap, it's a mana dork, but it has the potential of ramping you more than just by 1. Everyone knows Land of War Elves, Birds of Paradise, they only ramp you by 1. But when you have a 3 mana dork that can ramp you by more than 1, even if it's a more unconventional kind of a play, and as far as the Threshold goes, is it really hard to get Threshold? You have to have 7 cards in the graveyard. 1 board wipe and you're probably there. Not to mention the number of instants and sorceries that you use, those pile up in the graveyard. Any fetch lands that you might use, those pile up in the graveyard. As long as you're not reshuffling your graveyard into your deck with a Eldrazi or something like that, which, if you have them, I would definitely use them still. But it's one of those where it has the potential of just ramping you into oblivion, which is a really good thing and something that you really need to try to do. Especially if you're trying to go for a really, really big play, or maybe some tap-on-tap shenanigans. You know, it just gives you that much more mana. So, second card is, of course, going to be the Procenter Store. Third card. This is another one that you don't see very often, and is slightly older, but it's an artifact called Spawning Pit. 2 mana to play it. It says, sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Spawning Pit. That's it. No, I'm just playing. There's one more line. You pay 1 mana, and you can remove 2 charge counters from Spawning Pit and create a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token. So, a lot of people talk about having sack outlets in a deck. This is a card that is a sack outlet. It's an instant speed sack outlet. Is it the best sack outlet? No, it's not Ashnod's Altar, it's not Phyrexian Altar, and it's not Becerra Seer, because those are instant speed sack outlets that do stuff. They either ramp you, scry, any number of things. This one just builds up charge counters. Why is this card potentially better than people realize? Free sack outlet. Picture this. Now, this is going to be oddly specific. Let's say you're in token deck, or maybe your deck produces a lot of tokens. If you can't swing with those tokens, and you have a ton of mana left open, you're waiting for your turn to come back around so you can use your tokens and hit somebody really hard, maybe end the game, whatever. Then your opponent goes and board wipes. Maybe they use a Wrath of God, maybe they use Pyroclasm, whatever, and they just destroy the entire board. That could be a little bit problematic because you spent all this time building up your force so that way you can swing in for the win, now it just got taken away. Well, Spawning Pit is a cool sack outlet because, especially in that instance, you're not necessarily wasting your entire time. Because, yeah, you built up this army, it's about to get wiped, but then you sack everything with Spawning Pit in response before it gets destroyed. And then at the end of their turn, before it's your turn, you dump the mana, remove the charge counters, and get an army of 2/2s. It's half the size of what you had, but now there's 2/2 tokens. Maybe you only had a bunch of 1/1s. But an army of 2/2s out of nowhere could potentially win you the game. It could definitely put a wrench in whatever your opponents decide to do, because they don't see this kind of stuff coming. You could play a Spawning Pit and everybody's like, what is it? Oh, okay. Leave it alone. And carry on from there, and then this card could potentially be the thing that blows them out of the water out of nowhere, which is what you want to look for with an underrated card. Can the high-end potential of this be super, super good? The low end is a sack outlet. Okay, cool. Maybe you don't want your opponent to take control of your commander? Sack it. Put it back in the command zone. Get a couple of counters on it, and then you can every so often just spit out a couple of 2/2s. Another really good card that's very cheap. Not a lot of people use it. These are a lot of things that people need to take another look at. Think outside the box. That's the cool thing about Commander. We have such a huge card pool to choose from. Just think about what kind of crazy, wacky plays you can do. It doesn't necessarily have to be the optimal play. It could just be a really good play. It could be a one-time thing, or it could just be like, this'll work. Alright. Next card we're going to be talking about. This one, I've seen people talk about it on other YouTube channels, but I feel like it just doesn't get enough play out there in the wild. Me personally. It's Direfleet Daredevil. 1 and a red for a creature human pirate. It is a 2/1 with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, exile target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. You may cast that card this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So this lets you take a card, an instant or sorcery, out of your opponent's graveyard and use it as your own. This card is in red. Key thing to note, it's essentially a Snapcaster Mage that takes your opponent's spell and not yours. But it's also way cheaper because Snapcaster Mage is like a $80 card or better. It doesn't have flash, and yes, you still have to spend mana on the card to play that card, but it's essentially, it's something that red doesn't get to do that often, and it gives you access to things that red doesn't get to do. If you play this in a mono red deck or a Rakdos deck, you don't have many ramp options besides outside of artifacts. So if you're playing against a green deck, a Direfleet Daredevil, okay, I'm going to take your Rampant Growth, I'm going to take your Explosive Vegetation. Now you've ramped in red, which is something that red has a hard time doing. Or maybe you just need to draw a bunch of cards. Okay, Direfleet Daredevil, I'm going to take whatever draw spell you have out of your graveyard. Fact or Fiction. Or anything like that. And it comes with a 2/1 first striking body, which doesn't seem like much, but I mean, it stops tokens. You can use a trump blocker. Maybe if you're playing a more creature-heavy deck, it helps you get in for attacks. You never know. I mean, there's multiple uses for a card like this, and it's way cheap. It's a couple of bucks at best, and it's just a card that I don't see many people using that often. Yes, it's oddly specific on what kind of decks would definitely want a card like this, but I feel like if you're in mono red, you should run this. Rakdos or any red combination that has a hard time drawing or ramping. Direfleet Daredevil is just there, and it helps, because how many times are you going to sit at a table and there's nobody playing green? Think about that for a second. Alright. Last card that I'm going to talk about today. This one is so versatile, and I'm pretty sure it does see play in a lot of decks, maybe a lot more than I'm thinking, but I don't see it that often. Dosatron. It is a red and a black for an instant, and it says choose one. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard or destroy target artifact, or each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. This is an instant for 2 mana that has 3 really, really good modes. And it's one that most people don't see. If you're in red-black, Dosatron should be in the deck. And I'm a firm believer of that. Because of the 3 modes, you have Graveyard Hate. How many Graveyard Shenanigan decks are there? Lord Windgrace, Oldrotha, Gitrog, somebody using a World Gorger Dragon, Animate Dead combo, even in artifacts when you're doing like a Scrap Trawler, Walking Ballista, like combo to kill everybody in the game. This is a card that does so much work because one of the modes is exile all cards from the graveyards. There's your Graveyard Hate from target player's graveyard. So one person's out there doing a bunch of graveyard shenanigans way ahead and is getting out of control. Exile their graveyard. This card does that. There's typically at least one person doing graveyard shenanigans at the table that might be pushing them over the edge. Destroy target artifact. Okay, this is a typical red-black ability, but I mean, it's just icing on the cake. The main abilities that you're looking for on this card are exile the graveyard, or creatures. Each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. Okay, so somebody's going off infinitely, making a bunch of like mirror tokens or whatever. They have infinite tokens, and they're about to swing at you for the win. Okay, in response, before your attack, Rakdos Charm, all of your creatures deal 1 damage to you. Simple as that, right? I mean, it doesn't get much simpler than that. I've got 200 tokens. Okay, well, you ain't got 200 life, so boom. And you blow them out of the water with a Rakdos Charm. It's probably in my opinion, it's one of the best charms in the entire history of Magic. And when it comes down to it, you just gotta look at these cards and wonder, how useful is that? Can I use that? I mean, even if they're not going infinite with Rakdos Charm, you can still do that to a token deck. How many token decks are running around out there? Think about that one. So, a lot of these are just, take a second look at them. There's always something in this game. 20,000 plus cards. That's a lot. Commander has access to all of them. Minus the ban list and minus the unglued and unhinged cards and the conspiracy cards. But, I mean, conspiracy could be a different variant that you could play with, which is kind of fun, because Commander is a casual format. So, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Are there any other cards that you feel are underrated that you don't see really anybody talk about much? Are there any pet cards that you like to use and that just put you over the top in a game sometimes that people don't see coming because nobody else really uses it? Let me know down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.
We'll be right back.